It's Tuesday, the 4th of November 2014. This is Ecotastic. My name's Robin Yellow, and with me is Mr. Kit Knowles.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Kit. And you've got your little bar working across the bottom, and it doesn't work on mine because I'm using a crappy Chromebook.
Yes, nice little grey strip you get, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, because as you described in the pre-show, I'm running my laptop on a mobile phone chip.
Yes, an ARM computer isn't going to cut the mustard.
It's not going to cut the mustard. And you've been out talking to schoolgirls this week.
Yes, it was. It wasn't as daunting as I thought it was going to be. It was quite a good crowd. They were answering questions. It was good. I got a real sort of rapport with them. I was really focused on a kind of scare tactics up front. A lot of climate change. That was really good. Actually, went down fantastically. Talking about.
You were scaring the girlies.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. I thought it would give a taste of their own medicine, and then we moved on to sort of our approach to homes, and they're doing a whole project. So they've invited me back to be a judge for their award ceremonies, which is quite cool. So we'll see how that goes.
Oh, very good. Oh, really? Fantastic. You'll be giving school prizes out next.
They clearly want me to get drunk and...
Yeah, but let's move on. Let's start this week's show with the news. Now, car stories very much, Kit, but this first news story is a car story. And it's another study confirming that hybrids do best in cities and diesels on highways. The new study published in the UK this week, data from research from Emissions Analytics, found that both in terms of highway fuel, hybrids do best in cities while diesels do best on highways. Note that this study used UK market vehicles which are rated using the highly optimistic European testing cycle, and the specific model surveyed also aren't available in the US. I'm sorry, I'm really ballsing this up. I'm gonna slow down and try and read this a bit more clearly for the listeners. The study found that both types of powertrain did worse in city driving than highway driving, but the penalty was worse for diesels than hybrids.
So we were going to look at carbon equivalents, because I think it's really important to understand the impact of personal travel, especially when you're looking at kind of the cars and those side of things. I mean, it's always been known that what hybrids do good is cities. It's the regenerative braking, the low speed sort of extra torquiness of the hybrids, the electric drive chain in there. So it's not telling you anything new here. It's evident, and obviously diesels are going to be very efficient from the perspective of the journeying on motorways. The thing to bear in mind with diesels is, well, actually, let's talk about this pie chart that you've got here. So first of all, what Robin's showing here is an example of sort of a carbon mix. You can find loads of sources of this, and they all vary slightly, but broadly speaking, personal travel at 29% here. So it's usually around about a third is what's given over to personal travel. So that's flights and cars, basically. And they say that when you're looking at personal travel, when you're looking at cars, you're probably talking around about the services, home energy, and personal travel together and give you your personal carbon equivalent, which in the UK per head I think is 11.4 tons. Oh, no, 11.6 it says it there per person. So effectively a good proportion of that is down to your car. And when you're looking at the carbon emissions, what's really important to understand is that diesel is one of the dirtiest fuels out there, and it's a really complicated concept in that a barrel of oil has both diesel and petrol in it. So when you refine it and you fractionate it, you'll produce both. So it's not sensible to say just use petrol cars or just use diesel cars. None of that makes any sense on the basis that you're producing both, and to convert one into the other is massively wasteful. Huge amounts of electricity and excess energy are required to do that in either reforming or fracking. No, sorry, cracking. When you're looking at diesels on the road, though, you've got to bear in mind what's coming out the tailpipe is a huge quantity of unburnt hydrocarbons, which, in terms of the effect on the climate, it's far worse, between, I think, 40 and 150 times more effective in terms of insulating our planet than carbon dioxide, but also lots of localized issues in terms of particulate.
So, by the way, just to explain that, when you say 150 times more effective, that's 150 times more bad.
Yes, yeah, than carbon, well, it's per litre or whatever they measure it in, per equivalent of carbon dioxide. So the point I'm trying to make is that if you put fuel into an engine, you've got to burn it all, because if you don't burn it, it's far worse to be spitting out these hydrocarbons, particularly sort of the lighter hydrocarbons, than it is to be spitting out the carbon dioxide, which is coming from the efficient side of things. So anyway, when we're talking about diesel, you just got to bear in mind that it's dirty, and we're talking about petrol. It's much cleaner, but they both come out of a barrel of oil. When you're comparing it against hybrids, the news is basically obvious in that hybrids are efficient in the city. So none of that's a solution, none of that's fixing anything, but it is important to understand your impact in terms of personal travel is significant, a third of all your carbon output, you know, in terms of UK citizenship. So
everybody should be looking at how much travelling they're doing and making sure that they're only doing essential journeys. And by essential, I do mean going to work, going to the shops, taking the kids to school, just going to a neighbour a few doors down. They're essential trips. Let's move on to the news that The Guardian reported this week. The BBC in the UK are refusing to include the Green Party in general election TV debates. And the BBC has rejected a demand from the Green Party to be included in the proposed TV leader election debate, saying that unlike UKIP, it has not demonstrated any substantial increase in support. The broadcasters are proposing 3 debates, one including UKIP, one with just the Liberal Democrats, Labour and Conservative, another one with just Labour and Conservative. Now, the Green Party have been infuriated that they've been excluded and have won support in online petitions. And what the BBC are basically saying, Kit, is that while the Green Party has potentially more support and more MPs, or certainly at this time anyway, what it doesn't have is a rising tide of support. Do you think this is fair or not, Kit?
I don't know. I think Green parties would have done fantastically out of something along the lines of proportional representation, which of course the country voted against a while back now.
Well, they do get representation, of course, in the EU Parliament through the proportional representation system, but not in general elections.
But then so does UKIP. I mean, it's a really kind of, I don't know. It's a tough one. The reality is that you know, as a voter, do I vote Green? Well, in the EU elections, yes. In the local elections, not so much. I'm focused more on well, I actually live in a Lib Dem area, which is one of those rare spaces. But I normally vote Labour. But it's something I'm becoming more and more disenchanted by, and the idea of I don't know if you've been on the 38 Degrees website. That's something I find quite useful, and also something that I've actually invested in myself recently was the Vote for Policies website. I don't know if you could fire that up, Robin, because that's a really useful website for helping people make decisions in terms of you know, which party they should go for. And the reality is that you should be proportionately represented. If you've got big support, you should have the ability to put your voice out there. And obviously having these big televised debates and missing off parties is going to make it much more difficult for those parties to gather any momentum at all. But yeah, you're on the website there. Vote for Policies is absolutely fantastic, because you basically fill out a survey which is exactly all the different concerns that you might have from any perspective. You put your opinions down on it, and it tells you which party you should be voting. And it's really good because it's so transparent. It just lets you know exactly what everybody is voting and what everybody is planning.
Everyone's voting Green, according to this.
So the reason I put you there is basically because if you look at if you look at everything just from a policy, so if you actually start a survey, it asks you questions and gives you some answers, and it doesn't have any parties involved at all. It's simply question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. And if you vote based upon what's in their sort of what they're actually planning on doing, then you end up voting green a lot of the time, actually.
It's interesting, isn't it, that Lib Dems, of course, in the previous election were always very popular in terms of policies. And as David Cameron coined the phrase, "I agree with Nick," referring to Nick Clegg, leader of the Liberal Democrats. Certainly from a policy perspective, admired policies don't get the votes. Green Party clearly having the most admired policies and not getting any of the votes or the TV debate either.
I mean, the other way to look at it is that the reason they're getting more, well, they're getting the better, they're putting down better policies, more policies that people agree with, is because, of course, they don't need to live up to them, knowing that they won't get voted in. I guess there's got to be something along those lines in there too. But I would still love to think that we could have a democratic society which literally is voting by policies and not by sort of historical, you know. I would love to see that kind of revolution, but it's a long way away.
It's a revolution, and you and I will be leading the charge. The South China Morning Post World Edition shared the news this week that the hole in the ozone layer is still the size of North America. That was a rare piece of good news about the health of the planet, and in September, when a United Nations scientific panel declared that the Earth's protective ozone layer was beginning to recover, largely because man-made chlorine emissions were outlawed 27 years ago. But it is stubbornly remaining the size of North America, data from NASA suggests. What was this man-made chlorine that was outlawed 27 years ago, Kit?
Oh, that's the sort of CFCs. So these were things used in refrigerants. So basically any cooled goods, cooled transportation, anything that was using refrigeration cycles were utilizing CFCs as a fantastic heat transfer fluid, and they were basically being released in massive quantities into the atmosphere, and these would photochemically react. The sun would cause them to break down and create free radicals that would rip apart the ozone layer, which of course filters out a lot of the UV, the dangerous UV that comes from the sun. So it became a massive issue very, very quickly. The issue being also that these CFCs, once they form these free radicals, they can last in the atmosphere for decades, and that's obviously, we're basically still seeing lasting effects, lasting reactions occurring today for things that were released years and years ago.
However, better news, of course, that was an example of humanity clubbing together for the sake of the planet, so there is hope for us yet. Moving on, next, Green Car reported this week the UK's first solar hydrogen station opens. I know it's another car story, Kit, please forgive me. But a consortium of businesses including BOC, British Oxygen Corporation, I'm going to say, and Honda joined the Swindon Mayor, Councillor Theresa Page, and other dignitaries at a ceremony to mark the official launch of the UK's first commercial-scale solar-powered hydrogen production and refuelling facility, and saw a demonstration of green hydrogen production and low-carbon hydrogen transport in action. That was obviously the Honda Clarity vehicle, which is back in the UK this week. Designed and commissioned by the consortium, the new state-of-the-art facility is located, surprisingly, at the Honda plant on the outskirts of Swindon. The event was celebration of several significant firsts. In the UK first, this enhanced facility will produce commercial volumes of hydrogen produced from solar power by electrolysis at the point of use. And the station will employ BOC's filling technology to serve a range of uses, including the first hybrid vans running on biodiesel and hydrogen, the UK's first hydrogen-powered forklift trucks, and hydrogen-powered education centre. And why not? How do we produce hydrogen using electrolysis, Kit?
Well, this is something that's a bit of an issue, I would say. It's a pretty inefficient process. If you're looking at, you know, we talked about Tunisian sun and bottling hydrogen as a very dense energy source and shipping that over. I think this is where all of this could start to become a much more sensible prospect. But the reality is that if you're going to be installing very expensive technologies like solar power, like PV, and using that to run electrolysis, put it this way, if you've done the calculations as somebody with both PV on your roof and somebody who drives an electric car up, and you've looked at how much of that PV can contribute to your kind of driving side of things. And the reality is that it's not actually a great deal. You're looking at vehicles that are consuming, tens of kilowatts of energy at any given moment. It's a large energy drain, and you need a huge quantity of energy. If you put going into hydrogen and then coming back out of hydrogen, so the creation of hydrogen and then the utilization of hydrogen in a fuel cell, you've got 2 more rounds of inefficiency introduced in that chain. It's an immensely inefficient process, effectively, once you string all of those together. So I think the advantage is, what are they proposing? A few PV panels on the top of a garage? You're just not going to. You're not even going to run part of one car, let alone tens or hundreds of vehicles coming through there a day. So
you hit the nail on the head there, Kit. It's the inefficiency of the process, because it's all about taking natural resources, using them to convert into power in the most efficient way. And I agree with you, actually using electrolysis might not be the most efficient way of doing it, unless you've got, for example, you may have a hydro electric power station producing large amounts of hydrogen.
Anyway, you've got an excess of energy and an excess of space, like the Tunisian desert, right? That makes perfect sense, because once it's in the form of hydrogen, particularly compressed hydrogen, it's ridiculously dense energy form, and you can basically transport it wherever you like, and it lasts for a long. There's no kind of decay like there is in batteries. The energy doesn't drain away or leach away. So it makes a lot of sense in that format. And if you had that kind of a system or infrastructure in place, by the time it came over here, if you were going to top it up with a local wind turbine or a local PV array or a local, you talked about hydro then, if you were going to top it up with that all makes sense. But the bulk of the energy demand and the bulk of the infrastructure, it needs to come from somewhere with quite a massive excess of energy, somewhere where it can be done much more economies of scale and much cheaper, which realistically needs to be I don't know. We're going to go onto a wind power technology alongside our offshore wind farms, so maybe that would make sense along coastal areas. I don't know.
Yeah, me neither. Don't know the answer on that one. Looks like a bit of a PR stunt. Talking of a PR stunt, Treehugger reported this week that white solar panels could blend in with buildings and cool them down. Now, a Swiss company, a non-profit in Switzerland, have come up with a technology which will allow solar panels to just do that, replace windows in large buildings and be an unnoticeable addition to a roof. Is this real, Kit? Can you have white PV panels?
Yes, you can. I mean, the technology's sound. It's a not quite as good version of that technology I showed you the other week with from Holland, where you're able to change the opacity with a switch and generate more or less energy. But basically, what they're doing is they're saying, we're not going to just do it in the glass, but we're going to create a cladding so that the rest of your building can generate electricity at the same time. So the idea is that they're going to be, they've got a material which is white, which reflects a lot of the heat energy from the building, so you don't overheat commercial buildings. But of course, that's a negative when you start to get into the more kind of UK-based domestic side of things, where overcooling is an issue as opposed to overheating. But the advantage is that you can basically put these panels all over the building where you wouldn't typically have PV. But it depends on cost and all the rest of it. I have no idea if these are the same cost or even more expensive than the existing PV. Then I can't imagine that making any sense at all, because you're just going to be putting PV panels in very inefficient positions around the building. I mean, it's an interesting concept. It's using PV as a cladding form without the kind of aesthetic compromise. Whether it will catch on will definitely depend upon on cost. But they've basically got a transparent, in terms of energy, a transparent topper which is opaque to light, so you can give it color and all the rest of it.
But you do, I mean, I do hear complaints about the look of PV panels and how ugly they are. I quite like them myself, but I know a lot of people don't.
Yeah, no, I mean, it would give much more architectural flexibility. It just, it might lead to what's already a bit of a pandemic in the UK, which is the specification of PV panels in very non-optimal conditions. You know, mounted on the side of a highly shaded building is just the worst place for PV. Why spend that much money? So if you could, you know, clad your whole building in a particular cladding that all looked consistent, but in the most optimized positions, they were also panels that were making energy, at the, you know, generating energy at the same time. That would make sense.
Indeed. And let's move on to the final piece of news reported by powertechnology.com this week. Green Ocean Energy Wave Treader. The Wave Treader is a unique wave energy device that shares the offshore wind farm infrastructure and helps increase yield from the same sea area. It's attached to the transition piece of an offshore wind turbine and provides easy access to the turbine for the technicians to carry out repairs when needed, in addition to power smoothing in the offshore wind farm.
Yeah, this is a really interesting technology I stumbled across. Effectively, what they're doing is you've got wind farms offshore. They're big. They've got a lot of infrastructure in there. They've got a lot of capacity to generate energy and transport that energy onshore. And there's a lot of kind of the tower and all of the fixing the concrete and all the other infrastructure that goes into standing that up. There's a lot already there. But what they're doing is harnessing wind energy. What they're not doing is looking at the waves. So what this does is it retrofits a technology to the towers, which effectively generates the energy from the waves at the same time. And it's around about 500 kilowatts of extra power per installation.
That's impressive.
So if you start strapping this to every single turbine, what they're saying is that first of all, they act as bases. So at the moment, maintenance of these turbines are all done off boats, and it's a very dangerous business. Whereas this would actually give you a platform which is very stable at the base to do maintenance operations off. Secondly, you're generating 500 extra kilowatts of energy. Thirdly, the energy that's being generated from the wind isn't the same, won't be the same peaks and troughs in terms of supply as the wave. So you get this kind of flatness, kind of buffering capacity in terms of generating energy. So it's using lots of it would be sending all the energy back using the existing infrastructure, the existing wires, the existing inverters. Everything about it makes perfect sense.
Well, that's today. We're going to move into Kit's Tech Corner. And first up this week, Kit, is parans.com. Combine sunlight and LED light or go all in for sunlight. What's happening here, Kit?
Yeah, it's a really smart tech. So one of the things that we like is a lot of light in our homes, and a lot of the inefficiency in design nowadays comes from windows and the inclusion of windows. So people love loads of windows, but the issue being that those windows are both very expensive and also very inefficient, both in causing overheating and in overcooling terms. So what this does as a technology is really opens up a much more kind of passively sensible energy design on the basis that they have these big collectors that sit on your roof and they track the sun. And so when the sun comes up in the morning to when it sets at night, it generates a relatively even amount of energy, of light, which it then spreads throughout the building using optic fiber technology. Now, the beauty of this is that it gives you very good quality, I mean the best quality light you can imagine, in any position with the flexibility of optic fibers. Obviously it's limited as to how far those optic fibers travel without getting quite a lot of dropout in the performance. But the absolute beauty of it is that when the sun goes away, either at night or through clouds or whatever else, it can then filter in and boost up the difference with LEDs within the luminaires. So effectively, it doesn't matter whether the sun's out or not, it can maintain this kind of constant light day or night. So it's super efficient, very, very smart.
All right. Is lighting a big component of the carbon footprint of a typical house in the UK?
It is a very small component, but what is a massive component is windows and doors or glazing, and that is what this could really hit.
Okay, and you also had another piece of technology, which was the Sun Dollar Daylight Overview. I'm just going to share the screen here, and hope that you can make some sense of it, because it looks like a complicated diagram to me.
Yeah, it's relatively simple. The biggest issue with the technology I just showed you before,
what's going on here,
was the fact that it's delivering this light via optic fibers, which gives it a limited amount of penetration into the building, and also gives it a limited, it basically knocks out a good proportion of what you're collecting. What this technology does is it doesn't give you the flexibility of being able to cable it around your property, and so popping it into different rooms, which is fantastic again from a retrofit perspective. But if you were doing a new build, you could design your interior to take a core light, which if you could build this down a stairwell or anything along those lines, you could have interior spaces that would be lit with, I mean, this is on a much bigger scale in terms of the quantity of light that it's generating than that previous technology. And it does so with incredibly high efficiencies, and it can just penetrate down into a building. So sun pipes that you've come across have all sorts of limitations, which this technology would effectively overcome.
All right, very interesting. And are they expensive, these light tubes?
I assume so, and this is the first I'd heard of them this week. So, I mean, there's no costings anywhere.
Just in sunlight in the centre of a house.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, and it's as simple as that, you say?
Yeah, simple as that.
All you've got to do is design a house with a great big space in the middle, probably along the American model, rip the roof open, put something which could let water into the middle of it, and then you'd have light.
Yeah, well, I think they invented flashing kits a few years ago. I'm not really too worried about the water penetration side of things, but
yeah, I'll tell you, I'm worried about water penetration in my house, but that's a topic for another show. Kit, that's the end of this week's show. Quite a lot of news today. Too many cars for your liking, I know.
Yeah, well, cars are a big part of our lives nowadays, so I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about them.
Well, in future, I will try and keep the car content of the news down to 29% or less. That's it for this week. If you have any news stories you'd like us to look at, join our subreddit at ecotastic.reddit.com, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and if possible, come along next week at 9:30 UTC, same place, same time, and we'll see you then. That's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me. Thank you very much.